The subnet owner will come in and they'll say, hey, I want to solve a problem. They'll start a subnet. The problem will get solved. And it's like, well, then what do we do with that? Then some validator is going to build a product off of it. Like, excuse me, hold on, wait a minute. I built a subnet so that I could solve this problem. And I think that's where, like, we're just seeing that the incentive really is for owners to be building products because they're the ones with the vested interest in solving that problem in the first place. That's why they made the subnet.
The other thing I would say real quick is that every single exploit is an opportunity for improvement. That's how Bittensor gets better. That's how individual subnets get better. As you as a subnet owner figure out that miners have found a way to extract value from your subnet without contributing to the strength of your intelligence commodity, you fix that through your incentive mechanism. As Bittensor as a chain figures out how people can manipulate whatever to gain more emissions than they should be, we fix that. So that's the cost. Like, and people are like, oh, there's emissions going to this. It doesn't matter. That's the cost of doing business on Bittensor. If you don't feel the pain, you don't change the thing.
That is trust, and that is transparency, and that is voice. I think that if everyone feels like they have a good understanding of what's going on in a transparent way, they trust that the people that are doing things are actually doing what they're doing, or they say they're doing, and they feel like their voice is heard, then I think that will be the foundation for people to flood into Bittensor.
In a perfect world, it's the informed TAO swapper. It's the informed invest. Like, this is the truth. If everybody knew everything about all of the subnets 100% and were able to make the best decision, then there would be no governance required, because all of the individuals would have within them the full scope of everything going on within Bittensor and could make the best decisions based on that. Now, that's not the case.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Garrett Oetken and Keith Singery. We discuss the evolution of Tensora and TAO.com, the shifting roles of validators and subnet owners in product development and governance, changes in subnet designs and mining incentives, subnet collaborations for decentralized AI stacks, opinions on TAO Flow versus price-based admissions, addressing exploits and the iterative process of improving Bittensor, and the idea of future governance emphasizing its social elements, and advice for identifying trustworthy actors in the ecosystem. Now, back to Garrett and Keith with the 77th Ventura Labs podcast.
Okay, the Bittensor guru and Garrett. I guess I should refer to you guys as the carrot and the stick now from the new podcast. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. Yeah, we got the first episode of our new pod out, and it's been a fun ride so far. And it's just a cool experience to be able to share on that kind of a platform. And yeah, so it's a new venture for us, but it's fun.
And for anybody that, sorry, you go ahead, Keith.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, you can't even pay for this kind of access to Garrett. So for me, if you've listened to my podcast, you know that I'm a little bit weaker on the technical side. I don't have any coding experience or anything. I ran the Validator for 2 years, but relied very heavily on subnet owners and AI to basically get me there. And now that I've got this time set aside every week to pick Garrett's brain on how everything actually works in Bittensor, I think the podcast will allow us to basically bring a much greater level of understanding and fill in all the gaps that I've had, honestly, on my side. And it's easy for me to ask the right questions because I don't know. When I see these developments or announcements come across on the official Discord, I'm like, all right, here's what I think that means. Here's what I think it means for all the alpha and the trading, and how should I treat this as a change to the ecosystem. And to be able to run that stuff by Garrett and get a better understanding of it, that's really invaluable for not only for me, but for everybody involved in Bittensor.
And I was saying before the pod started, I think this is the perfect combo, like you guys alluded to on your podcast, of Garrett and his immense technical capabilities, and then Keith being one of the great orators of Bittensor, being the first podcaster to ever do it. And now you guys are chief evangelist of TAO.com, and I believe CTO of TAO.com. So what is this?
Yeah, I'm actually head of protocol at TAO.com. So it's a slightly more refined focus in there. But but yeah, it's a interesting position, and really it's just around our involvement as far as TAO.com goes in the ecosystem as a whole. That's kind of actually the angle that we're like going at it with our podcast is from that perspective of protocol involvement and ecosystem advancement. And that's really what my kind of more refined focus is at Tensora largely.
And what is this Tensora TAO.com entity? Like, how is this makeup actually structured? Because my understanding is Giles and Jack, they made Tensora back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
They're co-founders of that. And then Garrett and Yoav made some other entity, and now these entities are one.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, Yoav and I partnered up about this time last year. Technically a little bit before then, but when we were getting things going. But we started having some conversations with Jack and Giles, and we just thought it was like what we were doing was so compatible. We realized we were both attacking really the same problems in just different ways, and we realized that it just made a lot of sense to merge our companies together. So we merged and created a new entity, which is still called Tensora, but it's a new entity now. And so we're all moving forward as one. And then we have TAO.com as kind of our brand. So everything that we're doing product wise and whatnot is under the TAO.com flag. But we still are that core Tensora entity as far as the business is structured.
Keith, how do you feel about this? Back in 2022, if I told you you'd be part of this mega conglomerate that is created in Bittensor, what would you say?
I got into Bittensor so I didn't have to be a part of conglomerates anymore, or at least corporatized conglomerates. But after, having spent a couple years in the project, the need for like professionalism and organization around the development of tools to support Bittensor was just totally obvious to me. So and to give people a little background as to how you develop that, like as running when you run a validator, you're in the discords constantly. You're looking at the code bases, whether you understand them or not. You're looking at the readmes for everything that's going on within the subnets. You have to look at the miner readmes, the validator readmes. You get to know everybody involved in the project, from const on down to the smallest miner who wants to get started. And it became obvious to me after, really towards the end of 2024 that the most valuable thing for the validator that, to basically leverage the size and the capabilities of that validator was to put it to work in one of these larger organizations and sort of use it as a not even just a store of value, but a creation of value, not just for itself, but for Bittensor as a whole. And so when I started looking for things to do with the validator towards the end of 2024, and I came across Tensora, it was just one of these things, and there was some synchronicities around it also, but it was one of these things where I'm like, okay, somebody's got to take us out of the crypto Twitter, like just the echo chamber type thing. And now you fast forward a year later, and here we are with, really what is I would say, industry or space leading application in TAO.com that has the ability to onboard, thousands, eventually tens of thousands. Who knows how far we can take this of new users into Bittensor. It's like, makes things so much easier for the average person to get involved. And when I kind of made the bet on, transferring ownership of the validator, this, in my greatest of hopes, was to be where we are today, and we finally landed here. And so for me, it's the fruition of many years of kind of dedication to the ecosystem and using the part that kind of I've developed to help bolster this organization's position within the ecosystem. So I love it. And it wasn't easy. And from the beginning, I think we had Subnet 81 going, of course. And, that ended up shutting that down. So like it wasn't just like smooth sailing up and to the right, always, looking perfect. But when you put the goals that we had as TAO.com around the group of 30 or so individuals that we have working for the organization and Tensora at this point, is really a foregone conclusion that we're eventually going to get there, and now we got there and it feels awesome. And I think it's really going to pay dividends and bear fruit for everybody involved in Bittensor, over the next few months and years.
And this crypto Bittensor bubble that we were stuck in a couple of years ago, TAO.com is for sure the current easiest interface for new people to use and get to subnets. How do you guys feel about the sentiment that used to exist around validators were the ones that should be making products on subnets, and how it has kind of pivoted towards subnet owners being pressured to make the products? Do you think we'll see a pivot back towards the old sentiment of, hey, validators should use this bandwidth that they have to build the products?
I think that the reason why validators were the original product owners is because they were the ones that were operating the hardware that all of the output was being funneled to. And so it was kind of perceived that they were the ones with the opportunity to build products. But I think we pretty quickly realized that validators do not have the bandwidth to build products on every subnet and find those market fits in all those areas. Like, that's a whole business. Like, after you've already gotten the minor outputs from the subnet, now building a product off of that is an entire startup. And that is much more in line with the subnet owner's goal than it is with the validator's goal. Because the subnet owner will come in and they'll say, hey, I want to solve a problem. They'll start a subnet. The problem will get solved. And it's like, well, then what do we do with that? Then some validator is going to build a product off of it. Excuse me, hold on, wait a minute. I built a subnet so that I could solve this problem. And I think that's where, we're just seeing that the incentive really is for owners to be building products because they're the ones with the vested interest in solving that problem in the first place. That's why they made the subnet. Whereas the validators have this role in the ecosystem where they kind of have to, I hate to use the word shepherd, but they kind of have to kind of deal with and work with almost every subnet owner. And that makes it really difficult to focus when it comes to product development. You can't build 128 products or more as a single company. The validators would have to become such large entities. They'd have to raise so much capital, and the companies would be just so, diverse and focused, and I don't think that would really work. So I think the focus that has been readjusted back to subnet owners is correct. And I don't think that's going to go back to the validators. I think the validators' role is being much more refined now in terms of operation of the subnet and governance, rather than product ownership.
Yeah, and actually I would add to that the old school way of designing a subnet was always to use the validator as essentially bandwidth for access to the intelligence. So if your validator has a certain amount of stake, the miners are incentivized to respond to you because if they don't, they're going to take a hit on their emissions, right? So the way that always worked is there was sort of like a floor, call it like 20, 30,000, where anyone, as far as like weight on the subnet, where if a validator has less than that, the miners can just blacklist you and then they don't have to respond to you or whatever. So it created this like incentive to build these larger validators. But if you look at the way that subnets have started to, sort of evolve in these different directions, for example, there's multiple subnets in the top 10 that don't actually use that as the methodology for creating access to their intelligence. And maybe they don't have any actual miners in the traditional way that you would have seen it on the network a year ago, right? And now that's created sort of a bifurcation in the way that people see Bittensor working optimally, where you have these little fiefdoms in as each subnet, where people can just kind of like, owners can just say, here's how we're running this. We're not having any actual miners. You don't have to register, UIDs in the traditional way. We're going to control the alpha. We take it all and then distribute it at the end of the month. That requires, of course, quite a bit of additional trust than the original design of Bittensor, but that's their prerogative. And if they can then associate some sort of value with that or gain that trust from the community, then maybe they've earned the ability to operate in that way. But I still think, and we talked about it actually on our first podcast that Garrett and I did with the carrot and the stick, that, I think that we're going to see a transition towards putting more, not responsibility necessarily, but just like value on the validator that you're selecting. The first thing would be that now the validators default select the alpha, swapping when you're staked to root. So if you have your TAO staked to root on a certain validator, that validator will make the default decision to whether you're earning alpha on subnet 1 or whether you're earning TAO through the traditional auto sell mechanism that you have on root on subnet 1. So that's the first thing. That's a new development, just recently with Bittensor that never existed before. So that creates go ahead.
I will clarify that that's not on chain yet. So that's a to be implemented thing. But that is the direction that we're going in.
Right. So then that, leads us in the direction of creating additional decision-making parameters around which validator you're going to be staking to, because there's going to be these sort of alliances where the validator will decide to essentially lower the amount of auto sell based upon taking the entire root stake on their validator and deciding to keep the alpha instead of just swapping it to TAO. So for subnet owners, that creates and for stakers, that creates the incentive to learn a little bit more about what your validator's doing, learn a little bit more about the subnet, and create some real relationships. I expect that will also evolve into a kind of return to the traditional way of operating on Bittensor, where the validators do have access to the bandwidth, and that the products that are being built on these individual subnets, the access to those products does potentially come through the validator. And I think that that's a healthy way for a new subnet to sort of design themselves around, because there's kind of this question of like, as a subnet owner, how do I create value for my alpha token? And this is always the first questions. It's like, how do I ascribe value to my alpha? I've got all this stuff built. I've got this intelligence commodity, but does holding the alpha actually mean anything? Well, if you just stick to the principles that were like in the original design, that got us to this point, the value in alpha is inherent in that design. So that's what I would suggest if you're designing a subnet on Bittensor, is to take a really close look at, sticking to that and designing around it. And I think then the chain takes care of some of these questions around how do I create value for my alpha token.
And with how to create value for the alpha token, and as we talk about validators here, what do you guys view as the role of validators in the future? Because if subnet owners bear the responsibility of building the product, are they now not incentivized to try to garner all the alpha stake and say, don't stake to anybody else, just give us the stake, and basically block off every other validator?
What kind of Bittensor do you want to build? Do you want a subnet where you've got decentralization and you've got strength through that and you've got 15, 20 validators with, more or less equivalent stake? Or do you want to build, one single valid? I mean, it can run both ways. So as someone who's, got some TAO in your wallet and deciding which subnets you want to swap into, it's like, what kind of subnets do I want to support? It's a question really for the community than it is, and the community will decide. And if we want to do the research and highlight these differences in the way these subnets are built, and that downstream leads to different decisions as to which subnets are supported by the swapping of TAO, I think that will eventually determine the value of the validator.
Yeah, I will say that I think that validators are playing a much bigger role in governance now than they've been in the past, and a big kind of central point that I think validators are participating in, or that they're the role they're playing, is centered around trust. A lot of people are like, well, these subnet owners are doing some really cool things, or at least they say they are, but are they really? And the validators are the ones who are actually running the subnet owner's code to communicate with the miners and get ultimately the intelligence from that subnet. And so they can really opine on if that's legit or not in a way that a typical, maybe casual investor wouldn't really be able to know. And so a validator can say, hey, we back this subnet, or we are, we are committed to this subnet in running the hardware. And you verify that through having a number of other validators. And that's kind of where the original Yuma white paper with Yuma consensus kind of drove towards, is that, hey, we are doing the best we can to verify intelligence by having everyone else run the same code. And by doing that, and if they all agree with each other, then they must be on the right track. And then as a outsider, you can look at that subnet, you can say, okay, well, you have all these independent parties that are not related to the subnet owner that are all operating this code. And that gives me confidence that, oh, this subnet might actually be doing what it says it's doing. Now, there's a little bit of a complexity when you have subnets that really don't need 15 validators to run on the subnet operationally. And so what do you do there? How do you bring trust into that subnet, where maybe you really only do need a single validator? Like, to Keith's point, is like, you can build a Bittensor any which way you want. That's kind of the beauty of it. But it's kind of like the blank canvas problem, where you can do anything, but also it can be kind of paralyzing to not know exactly which direction to go. But with the single validator system, there needs to be a way to verify. And I think that's where we're going to see auditing and things like that come into play more often, where you have validators that maybe aren't running the code of the subnet owners as much, but they are verifying the validators who do run the code. And that way we can still have trust in the subnet without requiring there to be 15 or 20 validators if a subnet doesn't need that, truly.
Keith said an interesting point earlier, and that is, some subnets don't have miners in the traditional way. Both of you guys have been in the ecosystem for a long time now. How have y'all seen the ethos of Bittensor shift from when you first joined to now?
There's a lot there. I think mining has changed a lot, partially because of on-chain features like miner burn and things like that. But also people are just getting more creative in being more efficient with their alpha. So kind of the vanilla Bittensor is that you have weights that rank miners, and the miners get emissions on a regular basis based on where they sit in that ranking. The inefficiency there is that, what if you are in a certain rank, but you're actually not contributing a lot? Should you still get that portion of emissions? And this is kind of where the logic behind miner burn comes in, is that, hey, if there's a subnet that is inactive, or a subnet that is partially active but isn't really taking advantage of its full potential, should those rewards still be distributed to miners? And I think that's a big question that people go back and forth on, because one, it makes it highly profitable for miners to put in less work and still get, the percentage of the total alpha emissions for miners, which makes Bittensor very attractive to work for. But also it can leave money on the table. It can make capital inefficient. And subnet owners are starting to think of alpha as their capital, even though it's alpha that's being emitted by the chain. They never have possession of it, but it's their subnet. And so they're starting to think of this as, oh, this is capital that I can use to motivate people. And so if I'm paying someone more than I would pay them otherwise, now all of a sudden that capital is inefficiently used. And so people are coming up with all these creative ways to distribute that. the basic way is to implement some degree of miner burn, which is basically means that a portion or even an entirety of the emissions is just going to nobody. And so the total amount that goes around is going to be less. But the other thing that we're starting to see is this idea of a capacitor or a treasury. It's been called both things in the community. But this idea of like diverting funds to a pool that builds up over time, and then it can be released to either a group of miners or to even a single miner as in a winner-takes-all system, to where instead of miners receiving rewards on a regular basis, it's a little bit more contractual, where you achieve a thing and the capacitor or the treasury will pay you. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to partnering with people in the ecosystem on figuring out exactly what that should look like. Because right now people are doing things very creatively. And some of that is, difficult to see. It's not very transparent. And some of it is easy to see. It's as on-chain as it can be. But that's where I think a lot of the debate comes in on that side of things. Is a capacitor or a treasury model okay? Is that good for Bittensor? And should there be a native Bittensor way to do that, as opposed to using smart contracts or even doing something completely off-chain that we've seen happening in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I would also add that I've seen a huge change in the focus of development of subnets, mainly around the end goal. If you go back to prior to dynamic TAO, and for some of us, I think probably the last 10 months feel like 10 years in Bittensor. So it's hard to remember. But before dynamic TAO, we had the validators determining the emissions for all of the subnets for a year and a half. Right. So it was October of 2023 all the way up until, we launched dynamic TAO. Now, back then, and even now, but back then way more, every subnet was a research subnet, because everyone was, this whole thing about research subnets, everyone still is a research subnet. Some of them are researching something a little bit different. I'll go into that in a second. But back then, nobody talked about revenue. There was I swear I never even heard it. I might not even I bet you if you go back to the Discord and you look for how many times revenue came up before dynamic TAO, I don't even think it ever came up. The thing we were just looking for is users, exposure to Bittensor. If you go back to, the big breakthrough was Corcel, right? Because, you could do some of the fun stuff that you could maybe do on some of these centralized models, but it was powered by a subnet or two, and it was decentralized, and, a Mog machine did a great job of sort of showcasing what is possible on the network with that. But none of the subnets were designed to and there was no feedback mechanism because there was no alpha. Everyone was earning TAO. It was this sort of it was totally different than it is now. Now, fast forward to dynamic TAO launching, and now the focus for everybody, and maybe rightly so, to a certain extent, is how am I going to create revenue so that I can buy back my alpha token or create value for my holders, or create this, internal flywheel mechanism to take this chart up into the right, while we've got this sort of dilution mechanism of continuing to emit all of these tokens all the time, right? And that's fine. But I would tell you that everybody is still a research subnet. Shoots is still figuring out how to optimize its incentive mechanism and its offerings to create the best possible decentralized inference, platform, serverless compute platform on the planet. And it's going to continue to evolve. Same thing with Liam on the GPU side. Same thing with Hippias on the storage side. Same thing with Targon on the compute side. So there's these subnets that have chosen to focus in very, very closely on the generating value from a commoditization of their, quote, intelligence commodity. However, those subnets that I just named aren't really generating an intelligence commodity, right? Because the thing that they're offering you is almost like these, foundational pieces of the AI stack. or of really not even necessarily AI, but just of using the internet, using a computer, creating value from tools that use this technology, and these subnets are going that route. Then there's a whole, there's almost everybody else that isn't got one of, their teeth into one of these like basic foundational stores of value or value creation mechanisms in the form of inference, compute, and storage, and those are much more like on the hardcore quote research track. But I think what you're going to see then is these quote research subnets start to break through and create their own commodities that are true intelligence commodities that are a little bit higher up the stack maybe, but that have much more value in them for the end user, because they're not just a sort of, and I don't want to simplify too much, but they're not just kind of like using TAO emissions to pay the miners, and then it's a subsidization thing for these commoditized, intelligence commodities. And what they're actually creating is something that leverages the ability for miners to contribute intellectually and creatively to this intelligence commodity that unlocks a much greater level of value creation than maybe just like, the pick and shovel method of these top 10 subnets that have sort of found themselves successful at this point. And it's not really a surprise that those subnets are at the top of the heap at this point, because that's the easiest, the quickest way, the easiest way to generate value is to find one of these existing things that have demand, that have, maybe a little bit easier way to implement and like have an open router to plug into, for Chutes and Targon that allow them to create some value for themselves and their holders. But I really think that as Bittensor develops further, and you'll see some of these subnets that are on maybe quote a research track now, they'll start to unlock their intelligence commodity as this research continues to bear fruit, and you'll see a totally different level of ability of value creation out of those subnets, way different than we saw before Dynamic TAO, and way different than we've seen in the first 10 months of Dynamic TAO up to this point.
What is that ideal ratio for a subnet for miners to be hardware based versus skill based? What is the ideal balance there?
Who do you want to attract? What kind of investor do you want to attract? Like, are you gonna just swing for the are you looking for the home run ball every time? Then you want to go almost like full research if that research is leading towards a commodity that could be monetized in a way that could unlock a huge amount of value. This is Ridges, right? This is Ridges. This is where you have a very low cost on the miner side, and you take the abilities for miners, probably what they're developing every day in their day job, or maybe some other research or other subnets, whatever they've done to create themselves to the point where they can contribute to this, 10,000 lines of code that allow that agent layer to do the software engineering. That's like, who knows how much value could come out of that? Nobody really knows. Like, it could be monstrous. So that's one way. And it really is like a risk. It's an appetite of risk reward that I think as a subnet owner, you decide what you want to take on, so that's how I think that's played out.
Garrett, what would you say is that ideal balance between being 100% skill-based for miners or 100% hardware-based?
I mean, it does depend, but my excitement comes through an emphasis on skill. The reason being is because if it's hardware-based exclusively, then it just becomes a numbers game of how much does it cost to produce hardware versus how much emissions am I getting as a miner. And then there are some optimizations that do require skill, like latency and things like that need to be considered. But what I think is really exciting is when Bittensor is producing something intelligent that no one in the world has produced before. And I think when you produce a hardware service, that is a precursor to that. And so when I look at Chutes and I look at these other subnets that are providing this kind of infrastructure, I view that as valuable, but I view it in a different lens. I don't view that as, oh, they're going to kill AWS. I view that as they are going to be a further layer of decentralization in that intelligence creation. So this is what I'm actually really excited to see, is when you see subnets that are actually working together and cross integrating, where you have one subnet that is focused on training a model, but the other subnet might be focused on producing the hardware to train the model, and you have another subnet that might be producing data, or what have you, and you have this entire pipeline that's roped together to where no singular subnet is going to destroy the big AI players in the space, but collectively you are exponentially increasing your miner pool, essentially because you're using the miner pool of other subnets. We're saying, hey, I got miners that are producing hardware. I got miners that are producing intelligence with skill. They are engineers or they're researchers. And then I've got, miners that are producing all kinds of other aspects to the ML pipeline. I think that's all valuable. But I think the ultimate excitement of Bittensor and what will come out of Bittensor is going to be intelligence that no one's ever seen before. And that's going to be produced by skill, or that's going to be emphasized by skill. Because right now, the giant AI companies can always throw more money at data centers than produce hardware. But what is that hardware doing? And I think that's the big value of Shoots. That's a big value of Gradients. That's a big value of all these other hardware-based subnets, Liam, et cetera, is what is that hardware being used for? And in concert with what? And that's where I really see that going. And so I view the infrastructure subnets as being the foundational layer for the skill-based subnets to achieve terminal velocity.
And you're seeing this happen already. You just saw, what was it, a 70B get trained on Templar and then get fine-tuned on Gradients and then was hosted on Shoots. So this is how the whole thing works, you stack them all together. And I remember when we had the first subnet integration with the other one, it was they're talking to each other, but now we've got actual models being trained in a decentralized way. We've got them fine-tuned with one of these mechanisms that's, was pioneered by Ridges, but then Gradients, adopted, that allows for this fine tuning. And then we've got, like Garrett said, the infrastructure layer that allows for the hosting. And this is the holy grail. And now, you'll see that continue to expand to where the entire stack of artificial intelligence is represented by subnets on Bittensor. And where we don't have subnets, those subnets will emerge, because that's what our ecosystem demands. We don't want to be reliant on any of these sort of outside, sources for intelligence, data, training, fine tuning, whatever. And all of it will eventually be consumed by the mechanism of generating subnets and creating value in that way, and then linking them all together.
Yeah. And I think that, when we're seeing this orchestra of subnets that are producing value and producing intelligence, it is it's creating this ecosystem that is not it's not bound by any one particular subnet that's responsible for making a product that's going to break out and be the big winner. I think everybody's well, how are you productizing your subnet? Well, if we have this orchestra of subnets, you play one instrument. You could be a great solo artist, but what if you just played your part in this massive production? And then the product side can come via either at a different time, or it could even come from a completely different team. So it kind of relieves, I think, a lot of pressure when it comes to the when revenue question of research subnets, for example. If you say, hey, I'm researching this thing, I think it's going to change the world. How exactly it's going to change the world, we can collaborate with other people on. But we're going to produce a model, or we're going to produce some sort of output that is going to be the very best in its space, that's going to be truly innovative. You just laser focus on that, the revenue will come and the opportunities will come. And so OpenAI was not a product company. It was a AI research company. And I followed OpenAI for a long time prior to ChatGPT's launch. And it was very interesting. It was cool to see their progress. You had to try out the little betas and stuff. And then they hit something that actually worked really, really well. They finally got ChatGPT, something that the average user could use, and it would work remarkably well. It wouldn't make silly little mistakes. I mean, it made some, but relative to the previous models, it was pretty good. And once it got to that point, then all of a sudden they released products and apps and websites and things like that. But before that, OpenAI's ChatGPT interface was pretty rough. It was not super sexy because they weren't product people. And now we're starting to see that they've taken this massive lion's share of product market because of what they've produced. And I think the Bittensor is no different. It's like, focus on building the things that you're really good at building and collaborate with other people to create the final product. So that way it's not like, okay, we have a model and now we've got to build a website, we got to build infrastructure, we got to build all these things. It's like, there's a subnet for that, you know? And that's what I think is really key here, is that as subnets start to collaborate more and more, the pressure of any one particular subnet gaining revenue decreases, in my opinion.
Mhm.
How do we incentivize or cultivate this environment to where it's almost encouraged for subnets to collaborate? Because recently we've been seeing heightened tensions within just Bittensor in general. There's a lot of self-fighting within this orchestra currently. How can we avoid that self-fighting internally?
The self-fighting is more of just like, the water hole is getting smaller because the price is going down. So everybody's like a little bit closer than there used to be. It's like, that's why that's happening. When the price goes back up, it's going to be kumbaya again, and everyone's going to be holding hands and integrating and doing the whole thing. But obviously, like when price goes down, it really ratchets up the pressure on you to deliver on everybody, really, and creates a much more difficult operating environment. So I think this will take care of itself over time. But if you I think, look at the top subnets and the ones that are consistently integrating, there's no slowing of pace there. So I think that you're seeing the leaders in the space continue to kind of like lead by example in that direction. So new subnets, I think, will immediately, and you see this too with new subnets launching all the time. It's slipping my mind, but like, oh no, it's not. That's the subnet 45 is now using Dataverse. So like that's one of the more recent announcements of these kind of partnerships going on, but it's happening all the time. I think if you take the time to look, you'll see that almost daily you're seeing like new subnet integrations or some type of partnership being created. So I think it's all happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think the incentives are actually coming from the outside. I think when we think internally, everyone's their own company and everyone's trying to fight for their share of the emissions. It becomes very competitive. But I think when you have an outside player that has a demand for something, it's like, oh, I need a model. Oh, I need GPUs. Oh, I need data. Oh, I need, all these different things. Then all of a sudden, every subnet's a problem solver, not a problem. And then all of a sudden the motivation is there to integrate. And it's like, okay, I don't care if you have higher emissions than me. Let's just work together. And I think that motivation is natural. I think it will solve itself. But I think that will arise from, like, we talked about product and revenue. Taking that pressure off the subnets doesn't mean that pressure won't exist anywhere. And there will be product people. It'll be kind of a new class of people that are going to be like, hey, I'm going to create something off of Bittensor, but I'm not going to do it by making a subnet. I'm going to use all the subnets together to make my own thing. And I think that is when you start to see, okay, like, hey, I'm incentivized to make money as a product owner. So I'm going to try to make some deals here and here and here. And everyone's going to actually see the dollar signs, and then they'll be like, okay, everything's fine. I think that, and I think the market will correct for that. I think that the market will recognize that pretty quickly once that demand comes in. And I think that people will do what they do really well and be like very compatible with other parties. There will always be drama. That's humans, but I think that this is something that is self-correcting.
Both of you guys have been involved with Bittensor far before Dynamic TAO was launched. It's majority consensus Dynamic TAO was good. There's still some people that don't like dynamic TAO. TAO Flow was the next iteration of this. I feel like consensus for that being good is a little lower than dynamic TAO being good. What is your guys' opinion on TAO Flow versus price-based for admissions?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we mentioned this with the pod, the carrot and the stick as well, is I think that TAO Flow isn't as monumental of a change as DTAO was. I think it's perceived to be because of how much of a shakeup it was, but it really just changed the KPI that is tracked for emissions. It used to be price. Now it's TAO Flow. Now it's net TAO going into your pool. And I think in a lot of cases, those aren't practically different. If your price is going up, your TAO flow is going up. Like those, you can't have negative TAO flow and have price increase. But the reason why this is TAO flow and not price is because it is possible to maintain a price with very little activity and very little mind share. And TAO flow is basically saying like, hey, not only is your price going up or that it's a good price, but are there people that are actually buying on your subnet? Because I think we've all seen brand new subnets that have like no liquidity and their price is like 7 TAO or whatever. I mean, those are fake. Like, don't ever buy that. But the reason the price is high is because there's no buyers and sellers. They just, that's what the ratio is in the liquidity pool. A very, 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 very small liquidity pool. And so TAO Flow is basically just saying like, hey, it's just a refinement of that. To say, hey, yes, price matters, but price matters if people are actively trading on your subnet. If they're not actively trading, if there's like nobody on your subnet and you have a price of half a TAO, like, why do you deserve the lion's share of emissions?
I would say it's also one of these things that's only possible on blockchain, and only Bittensor has the guts to do it. So if you go look at the top 50 cryptocurrency projects, who has any kind of emissions that are distributed like TAO Flow? Probably nobody, right? I've never heard of it. So correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but like, and this is like industry leading incentivization again. So it's just more of what Bittensor is at the DNA level, now realized on chain by really like putting our code where our mouth is through this TAO flow. And what it does is really it makes everybody, it's what have you done for me lately forever, And so like what better way to incentivize subnet owners to develop then make that the thing that determines how you get emissions through Bittensor. It's great. It's sometimes it's like paradigm breaking. It's mind breaking at a certain point because you're like, I got so much investment here, but but my emissions are zero. It's like, well, are you shipping things that the community is interested in, and whatever value that you've accrued at this point, is that value according to the community worth adding to now, or do we need to let you cool off a little bit? That's all it is. It's actually kind of pretty simple once you zoom out a little bit, and I think it's a beautiful mechanism to unlock the kind of like to spur the next avalanche of development on these subnets.
We've seen some self-described exploit subnet owners where they just stake their own TAO to their subnet to exploit the TAO flow mechanism. Do you guys consider this an exploit as they describe, or is this what the system incentivizes?
It's a balance, and Garrett said it before the podcast, I think, or maybe it was in the first couple minutes, that the code is law thing. It's like in Bittensor, you can only really like set up the rules of the road, and if people can keep the car on the road and drive and do the things without actually like manipulating anything at a greater level, then they're free to do whatever they want to do. So if they want to invest and try to manipulate stuff, like, okay, but what we need is the market to come in and fix all that by being interested in the subnets that are actually developing, and then lower the amount of emissions that are going to these kind of like gamed subnets or maybe owner financed emissions. and that will fix all of that stuff. So yeah, go ahead and try and do it. But like, are you going to be swimming against the market? I don't know. Like I wouldn't make that bet with my TAO.
Yeah, I think that as far as exploitation goes, there are always going to be subnets that are going to try to exploit emissions. We saw that before TAO Flow. We're seeing that after TAO Flow. I think that is the tricky nature of code is law, is that at the end of the day, if someone can technically do something, they will do something, unless socially enforced some other way. And now, what are we to do about that as a ecosystem? Well, we monitor that and we see, are there any cracks in the armor that we need to patch? We saw that with DTAO. I mean, DTAO was a process. It was not, I mean, there was that one day of launching DTAO that was the big moment. But then in the months that followed, there was monitoring, there was gaming that was happening, and there were adjustments that were made just to try to stabilize the ecosystem and make it, just a little bit more fair. And TAO Flow is going to be no different, has been no different. It's something that I know that the team at OTF is monitoring all the time. And that's just a part of the process when you're dealing with an ecosystem where on purpose you are not vetting every person in the ecosystem, where it's permissionless. It's in many cases it's anonymous. You have to build a system, and this is something that harkens back to a conversation I had with Jake last year, is the challenge of Bittensor is building a system where you have to assume every single player is a bad actor, and yet somehow something good still comes out at the other end. And that's a pretty difficult machine to build. Is you assume the validators are bad actors. You assume the subnet owners are bad actors. You assume the miners are bad actors. I mean, assume everybody's a bad actor. But does the ecosystem incentivize something useful being produced at the end of that? Now, hopefully, not everybody is a bad actor in Bittensor. Hopefully, most of us are actually well aligned on values and goals. But as an ecosystem, we need to be thinking about, okay, if everybody is a bad actor, how are they going to exploit this? And that is a game that is constantly being played. And it was played before DTAO, after DTAO, before TAO Flow, after TAO Flow. And I think we'll see just more examples of things that might look like exploits, but I think we'll see this refinement of the exploits will be a lot less effective. And what we classify as an exploit 6 months from now will be different than what we classified as an exploit 6 months ago. And in the case of this particular TAO Flow exploit, that involves them, seeding capital into their own subnet. And so there is risk involved there, playing with money, which, prior examples of an exploit may not have required that. And so I think we're already seeing that there's some tightening happening here in terms of the left and right boundaries for bad actors, but it's an ongoing process.
The other thing I would say real quick is that every single exploit is an opportunity for improvement. That's how Bittensor gets better. That's how individual subnets get better. As you as a subnet owner figure out that miners have found a way to extract value from your subnet without contributing to the strength of your intelligence commodity, you fix that through your incentive mechanism. As Bittensor as a chain figures out how people can manipulate whatever to gain more emissions than they should be, we fix that. So that's the cost. And people are like, oh, there's emissions going to this. It doesn't matter. That's the cost of doing business on Bittensor. If you don't feel the pain, you don't change the thing, And so all the things over the last several years that Bittensor has been experiencing through its, growing pains to get us to this point have led to hundreds or maybe thousands of developments that have in the end strengthened the entire protocol. So I love to see an exploit. Because I'm there was a hole that we didn't really think about during the first, when we released the last iteration of Bittensor, and here's a way we can close it. Let's implement that and let's find the next one. And then we just do that forever. And that's what Bittensor is.
In this evolutionary process of patching these exploits forever, do we ever reach that ideal end state of assuming everyone's a bad actor, but since we're able to align the selfish interests of every individual to the benefit of the collective, is that a possibility to ever reach a feature complete ideal state?
I think it means, or it depends on what you mean by feature complete. If by feature complete you mean that the code is enforcing that 100%, I think it's going to be a struggle to get there, because we're people and people will do things unexpected. People will do whatever they need to get to their ends. And I think there is a social degree of enforcement that is needed in Bittensor to succeed. What degree that is what is up for debate. But I think this goes into governance. Governance is going to change in 2026 for Bittensor, in terms of chain upgrades, in terms of what to do with bad actors and things like that. And that is something that I think arose just from a need that came about pretty clearly, that it's really difficult to just keep adjusting the rules of the game to make it so it's impossible to do something with a malicious intent or a unproductive intent. That creates some restrictions that might be squeezing too hard. It might restrict another subnet that is doing something good from being creative and solving a problem in a unique way, which is a key part of Bittensor's DNA. Like Keith's point is, an exploit in Bittensor is an opportunity to improve. It is a painful way to grow, but that's how you develop and grow as a person. That's why you go to the gym. It's painful to go to the gym, but you do it anyways because you grow and you get stronger. I think Bittensor is no different, but I do think there's a social element to this as well, where we all generally align on these principles on what makes Bittensor special. It's not like, well, I think Bittensor should be something like this, and you think it should be this thing, and you think it should be this thing, and somehow we all work together on this. It's like, no, we have a vision for Bittensor that we're all in on. And I think there is a social element there that is needed.
I think as a human race, that's going to be the last. Governance is the last thing to try and figure out. It's the hardest thing to get right. What's the Churchill thing? Like, democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else that's been tried. Like, that will be the hardest thing to figure out, but it also holds within it probably the most value for the network if we can get that right in the end. And that will be a iterative process when we get to that point of really using governance to maybe make some more decisions that have been made in smaller circles up to this point. So I look forward to seeing Bittensor evolve and kind of taking that next step of growth and determining how we're going to treat this protocol from a governance perspective long term.
In your guys' mind, what is that ideal form of governance look like for Bittensor? What does that social enforcement layer look like?
Well, like in a perfect world, it's the informed TAO swapper. It's the informed Like, this is the truth. If everybody knew everything about all of the subnets 100% and were able to make the best decision, then there would be no governance required, because all of the individuals would have within them the full scope of everything going on within Bittensor and could make the best decisions based on that. Now, that's not the case. So how do you take a community that has a limit to the ability to absorb information and act as sort of self-governance by investing in things that are investing in subnets that are worth investing in, and combine that with the ability to change the protocol? There's definitely another layer beyond the market that's required. And so what we'll see, I think, is the validators play a role. We'll see the market play a role. We'll see the subnet owners play a role. And if you kind of combine all of those things, which I don't know what the perfect sort of combination is, I think we'll see that develop as we go into 26 here. I'm excited to see it. I don't know what it is, honestly. I think it's a combination of everybody, though, of course.
Yeah, I think that a few keywords come to mind when I think about governance, and that is trust, and that is transparency, and that is voice. I think that if everyone feels like they have a good understanding of what's going on in a transparent way, they trust that the people that are doing things are actually doing what they're doing, or they say they're doing, and they feel like their voice is heard, then I think that will be the foundation for people to flood into Bittensor. How exactly that gets implemented, I know is something that the team at OTF is working on a lot. I don't want to get too far into that because that's still being designed, but it does involve gathering the sentiment of the subnet owners, the validators, etc., in concert with the triumvirate for not just chain upgrades, but for other things as well, but really just proposals in terms of what actions should be taken on chain. We have a version of this in the Senate today, but it's not nearly as effective as it should be. And the new governance models that the foundation is putting together, I think, are going to be really helpful. But that's really like the regardless of how it's implemented, the goals should be that Bittensor becomes a trustworthy platform, it becomes a transparent platform, and it becomes a platform where the community sentiment is heard in the decisions that are made. So it's not a disjointedness of everyone thinks A, but what actually happens on chain is B. And once we get to that point, then I think that people will say, okay, you know what? Bittensor is something that I can build a business on, or I can start a subnet in, and that becomes more predictable, becomes more trustworthy, and that's where we want to go as an ecosystem. And I think that's going to be a big part of 2026. Is we 2025 was we make these radical changes to how Bittensor fundamentally works, to make it really the ecosystem that we want it to be. Like we're building this ecosystem now. 2026 is like, okay, how do we harden this ecosystem so that it's ready for scale? And then I think beyond that is achieving that scale. After that, it's once we've hardened ourselves, we've got some robustness, and we've learned our lessons from a few exploits. Then through that, we will be ready for massive scale and massive adoption.
Before I ask you guys the final question here, is there anything else on y'all's mind, or did y'all want to demo the app, or anything else you guys feel we should cover before I ask you the last question?
Yeah, I'd love to walk through the app and just show you and your audience like what we've been cooking up lately.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Let's see the easiest interface in Bittensor currently.
Let's do it. All right, sharing screen. All right. Well, this is the TAO.com wallet app. This is a successor to the Bittensor wallet. So if you already have the Bittensor wallet on your iOS device, you can just update that and you'll get this new experience. This is something we've been cooking up at TAO.com for quite a while now. And we really had this goal of this being the cleanest and most user-friendly gateway into Bittensor. And I think we've achieved that here. So I'll just give a quick demo. I know there's other media out here on this, but for this audience in particular, right up here at the top, we've got our balance. Just easy to see. This is your cumulative balance of all your assets in Bittensor. I can click on this and it tells me what that's worth in dollars, which is super helpful. And if I do that, you can see that it denominates in dollars all throughout the app. Which just makes things super easy to see. At the top right, I've got the price of TAO. I can tap into that and I can look at all kinds of metrics. I can even buy TAO right from the app experience. And I'll basically just type in a certain amount that I want to buy. It goes through Coinbase, so it'll actually kick me out of the app to go through the Coinbase experience. You can use Apple Pay, a debit card, whatever's available in your region. It'll kick you back to the app once that's done. So really just easy way to get into TAO for starters, and it's all in this app experience here. And I can see my balance as it grows and changes, and I can see that here, and see what that looks like in dollars or TAO, either way. That just makes things look, it just makes things a lot more transparent, a lot more clean. And then once I've seen my balance here, I can see this little banner that's like, hey, wait a minute, you have an available balance of 1.17 TAO, and you're missing out on some APY. And this is my free balance that I don't have staked at all. And this is a prompt for me to go ahead and stake this. And it will stake it to root. But we just refer to it as staked because we wanted to make sure that the language was done in a way in this app that is just really user-friendly, and that they don't have to go through Bittensor University to figure out how to use the app. People in crypto are familiar with staking. This is that. And so we wanted that to be super easy. And the other thing is just that there's a significant percentage of TAO that is in who knows how many people's wallets that are not staked at all to root or anywhere else. And this will help solve that. Is when you import your wallet into this app, you'll be able to see like, oh, you've got TAO that is unstaked, so go ahead and do that. But what about my TAO that's staked into the subnets? Well, I can see my holdings here. I can see all the subnets that I've got, and it's a clean interface here. I can see my recent activity here, but let's just dive into an example here. I'll use IOTA here, and my balances are off because I was buying and selling from prior demos and whatnot. But you can see my balance, you can see my alpha token positions, and then I can also just click right into a subnet page, and I can see, oh, look, they're up 3% this week. That's fantastic. I can look at stats and rank information and whatnot, and this is information that you're accustomed to seeing in other apps, but this is really just served up in a beautiful way that is just easy for people that are either less familiar about this space, or maybe they just want a clean interface so they don't have to wade through a bunch of technical on-chain information to get what stuff they care about. And we also have this off-chain information that is really describing like what is the subnet, what is the company behind the subnet. I can look at information about the prominent leaders and figures in those companies, and I have links to reach out to them and to connect with them so I can go learn more. And I think what this does in this experience is that it makes the subnet that much more real, where there's like, oh, there's people behind this, there's a project behind this, there's a mission behind this. And I think that will drive confidence for people when it comes to investing. And so we've got news and videos and stuff that we can show here as well. But this is really just our glance at a subnet that allows me to make a decision of should I buy more, should I sell, or maybe discover a whole new subnet. So I'll just go through this flow real quick of buying. I'll just add like half a TAO that we'll add to IOTA here. And we see we have a clean interface here. It's asking me for a password, but that's just because I'm screen sharing. It also supports Apple Pay, or not Apple Pay, Face ID. And with Face ID, you can approve all your transactions. And so that is the absolute cleanest interface for buying a subnet anywhere, as far as I'm aware, in that you don't have to worry about your private keys and whatnot. All of that is stored on the secure Enclave on device. And you can use Face ID. So you don't even have to use passwords. It's a super easy way to buy subnets. As you see, it says it's buying right now. It will take a little bit of time just with on-chain stuff to go through, but I am not blocked. I don't have to wait for that to go through to continue using the app. I can proceed with the experience. and I can explore and search for new subnets here. I can choose if I want to go based on market cap or token price or what have you. And I can just go through all of these and can find a subnet here like Synth. There's a subnet I don't have a position in yet. Oh, look, they're up 14%. What is this? What is Synth? I don't know. I got video content here I can look at. I've got a bullet point list of exactly what is incentivized, what the roadmap is. So this is like really illuminating for people that have no idea what these subnets are really about, and they're a little bit too daunted to go into GitHub or something like that. And they just want to see like, what is this about? What are they trying to do? What are they going to do? And of course, I can see information about the people behind it, and I have links to go follow them. And I can go ahead and buy the subnet too, which is the same experience as before. But we also have categories here, so it's just a really quick glance at kind of what realm this subnet is operating in, and I can see if it's interesting to me. So that's a quick look at the TAO.com app. There's more features we could dive into, but I just want to give you guys a quick glance at like what this experience is like, and just how easy it is to get into TAO and then to get into subnets, and to do that confidently. It's not just about the tooling; it's about the information that comes alongside that tooling. So that really, this just feels right at home, and this feels like the good spot to manage your TAO. It will have more advanced or pro tooling for our desktop app that's coming later in 2026. For those of us who are more sophisticated, that want maybe a fresh TAO.com experience, but still have that capability of a more advanced tool. But this is our first product here as the iOS app. And I think it's a pretty significant increase in experience and just user enjoyment from the prior Bittensor wallet app.
Could you talk me through the security aspect of this wallet? How does the seed phrase get stored? Those type of things.
Yeah, great question. So we still ask people to write down their seed phrase and do all that. So the seed phrase is not stored on device, but the private key, which is the other flavor of the seed phrase, that is stored in the secure enclave on your Apple device. And previously, like when you store this kind of information in like an app or something, it's usually an encrypted file. And this is encrypted as well, but this is also stored on Secure Enclave. So it's actually, for those of you who don't know, the Secure Enclave on iOS or on iPhones is a separate chip completely from the rest of the phone. It doesn't share the same storage. It doesn't share the same anything. And it's only there for here we have inactivities for security. Speaking of security, but it's only there for storing credentials and things like that. So it's the most secure way you can store private key information on your local phone. This is a non-custodial wallet app, so your keys are your own. We do not have access to them as TAO.com, and so you can have peace of mind there as well. And what you just saw there was an inactivity blocker. Is that if it senses that the app isn't being used, it will actually request Face ID, and in this case it was Touch ID because I was screen sharing. But that's another security feature here, is that we just allow that extra layer, where if you're not comfortable with showing off your balances and whatnot, we're not going to make that super easy for someone else to get into your phone and do. We're using Face ID as an authenticator throughout the experience.
Keith, what's the most overlooked and underappreciated aspect of this experience here?
The team has put so much work into making it easy to invest and to absorb information about these subnets in a fast and easy way, and to put it all on one application. And then Garrett just went through all of the security aspects that really make it much easier to just do Bittensor. But in my opinion, it's the subnet pages and it's not even really close. Actually, as a subnet owner, you can come in, take control, take ownership of your subnet page, so that you can now offer to the community one spot to go for all of these updates about everything that's going on in Bittensor. Because like you said, Garrett, nobody's going to go to the GitHub all the time and monitor for, code changes. Like, nobody's going to the Discord every day and going to scroll up to the last, 200 messages to try to figuring out what's going on in the subnet. And it's really hard to go into even like X, where you have a lot of these updates happening, and it's kind of like stay on track with getting these subnet updates, because they're in your feed with everything else that's going on. So like, it's actually, even as someone who's trying to stay up to date with this stuff every day, before this app, there really wasn't a good spot to find this information in a clear and concise and easy to digest way for all of the subnets in one spot. That's what we have here. That's what I hope is going to unlock a totally different level of like visibility and learning for the average person that's interested in Bittensor, and then the ability to empower the subnet owners themselves to come in and update that information. Like, that's what we needed, and that's what this is. So this, it's really a perfect implementation of what we need to take this thing to the next level.
Absolutely. Well, unless there's any other features you feel should be covered on this, I got one last question for you guys here. And before we got into the demo, we were talking about governance and what the future of that looks like. And a key word both of y'all used was trust. A lot of people that are in the ecosystem, but not too deeply involved and are closer to like passive investors, they don't know who to trust. They see these people, they see these talking heads, they see these accounts. They don't know if the information's true or not. They can't themselves go look at the code and verify, is this subnet actually doing X, Y, Z? They don't necessarily know how to navigate TAO stats and see which UIDs are receiving the admissions, who's burning what. What advice do you have for the average person to be able to identify who to trust and identify who's a good actor versus a bad actor? What advice do you have for identifying who to trust in Bittensor?
We're still small enough to where you can get into personal contact with every single subnet owner on Bittensor. No matter how many, if you don't even have to hold any alpha, they'll give you the time of day. So I think that a lot of these guys are either on podcasts, or they're on a novelty search, or they host calls on X, or you can reach out to them directly. Like, you have to, the closer you can get to firsthand knowledge of somebody, and honestly, the closer you can get to a face-to-face interaction. Obviously, you can't, fly out and meet everybody, but come to Exploit next year. Like, that's in March. That's the event that's being held at I think it's the 30th and the 31st in San Francisco. It's going to be probably 100. I would guess almost all the subnet owners would be there. Like, get a chance to shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye, make your own decision if this person is somebody that you trust in shepherding your wealth, into whatever the next year or months of however long you want to let them, ride on your TAO swaps, and make that decision for yourself. You don't need to listen to me, Garrett, whatever. You got to do the work if you're really going to put a lot of your net worth into Bittensor, to get to know these individuals on a personal level. And I think that's the best way to build trust and to get an accurate vision of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And like right now, it is very social in terms of like getting an understanding of who people really are. But also, we are small, and so we don't have like these regulatory bodies that are verifying and checkmarking things. And so, if you want to really put a big chunk of your net worth in, then understand the people behind these projects that you're looking into. And that's a big part of like why in our app we include information about the founders and about the high level officers. It's like, and we have links to go follow them and connect with them on LinkedIn and Twitter and things like that. It's like, we want you to go down that rabbit hole and learn for yourself. Don't let us speak for them. That's why we have that claim feature where subnet owners can post their own things within our app experience. And I think that that's absolutely essential to starting that journey and deciding to actually put money into a subnet. Because it's difficult to really know objectively who is good and bad. Unless you're maybe some code wizard and you can find exploits or something, but I'm going to assume that most casual investors are not that. And so it really just becomes a social game. Like, do you believe that this person is honest and that they're actually making a real effort to solving a problem? And I think that's usually pretty easy to sniff out.
Garrett, Keith, always a pleasure talking to you guys. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks, Grant.
Awesome. Thanks, Grant.